When the bear stepped out on the edge of the clearing and looked straight at us, my breath caught because I knew this wasn't an accident. I'm a man who lives by the woods and works for the woods, a middle-aged forester who reads tracts the way other people read newspapers, and still my hands went cold. I was standing off the trail with my pack open, making notes about wind-fallen pines, when I saw her first, a young widow from the outlying houses, a scarf tight on her head, dragging a bundle of dead branches, while her little boy kept stumbling after her. I thought it would be another ordinary day. I thought I'd nod, maybe carry her load to the path, and go on with my rounds. I thought the forest would stay quiet and reasonable. I thought he would turn away and vanish back into the trees, and that would be the end of it. But nature had another plan, and I felt it the way you feel thunder in your bones before you hear it. The bear was a giant, old and thick across the shoulders, winter still clinging to the long hair along his spine. He did not huff. He did not rise. He just watched, and that was worse than any roar. His eyes were the color of wet bark, and they found my face, and then the woman's, and then the small shape by her skirt. I waited for the snap, claws tearing the ground, a lunge, the scream, the sound I have dreaded since I first took this job. But it didn't come. He shifted his weight one step to the side, as if to put his body between the tree line and the child, and I felt my heart trip over itself. The widow froze, arms still hugging the bundle of sticks, a twig poking her cheek, not daring to move. The boy looked up at the same time the bear tilted his head, and the strangest calm slid over the clearing. I could hear every small thing. A single drop of melted snow falling from a spruce, the dry click of a beetle in the bark near my elbow, the low breath of the bear as he drew the air in and tasted it. He was measuring us. He was weighing something I could not see. I lifted one hand without thinking, palm open, and the bear's gaze touched me again. He looked at me like I was one of his own, and that made my knees weak. I have seen bears stand to break a wasp nest. I have seen them roll a log as if it were a toy. I have dragged hunters out and patched bites, and I know the hard rule that keeps people alive out here. You don't meet the gaze of a big predator, and you don't hold it. But I could not look away. The boy took a step, a clumsy little step, a boot catching on a root, and the bundle of sticks slid from the woman's arms and rattled down onto the frost-scarred grass. The sound should have snapped the spell. The bear only blinked. Then he did the first impossible thing. He lowered his head and made a soft, deep sound that wasn't a threat at all, a sound I've only heard between a sow and her cub when she calls him to stay close. The woman's lips parted. The boy went silent in a way no adult could ever order a child to be. That sound ran up my spine and set every hair there on edge, not with fear, but with something that hurt more, something like awe. I took a careful step into the open so the woman could see I was there. I kept my eyes down and my shoulders rounded. I spoke in a low voice. All the words I could find were small. It's all right. Don't run. Don't look at him. Don't cry. The bear swung his muzzle toward me and breathed, and it came to me like a scent, resin, damp earth, a trace of river, and beneath it, something warm that I can only call patience. He wasn't here for meat. He wasn't here for a fight. He was here on some business that had nothing to do with us and everything to do with us. He moved again, another careful step, paused silent, claws drawing faint white lines through last year's leaves. The child's cap slipped. It tumbled once, twice, and landed by the bear's foot. I thought that was it. The little flash of color, the sudden motion. I thought the forest would go red and loud and ugly. Instead, the bear paused, lowered his face until his nose almost touched the wool, and then turned his huge head away from it, as if he knew it was small and human and belonged on a small human head. I felt a sting behind my eyes that shame and sense said I should swallow, but I didn't. I let it burn. The widow made a strangled sound and bit it in half. He did not cross to us. He did not retreat. He set his body like a gate, shoulders squared, watching the dark between the trees beyond the clearing. I followed his stare into the timber, and the hair on my arms crawled for a different reason. The world back there was too quiet. Birds held their tongues. Even the wind polished its steps. The bear's ears twitched, quick, precise, like hands tuning a radio. He knew something was coming in a way we could not know. That knowledge was a weight I could feel pressing on my ribs. I wanted to say a brave thing. I wanted to tell the woman to back up, to ease toward the path and take the boy home and lock the door and boil tea and forget all this. I wanted to tell the bear that I understood, that I would help him hold the line, though I don't know what that would have meant, or how you help a creature like that do anything. My throat gave me nothing. My breath went shallow. I could taste metal. I could hear the boy's little teeth click together as he clenched his jaw to keep from crying. And then the bear looked at me again, not at the woman, not at the child, but at me, as if handing me a task that had no words. I nodded, though my head felt too heavy to lift. The widow saw the nod and shifted her weight slow as winter. The boy reached for her hand and found it, fingers slipping between hers, small and fast, like a bird finding a nest. The bear watched us make that choice and did not move at all, and somehow that stillness was louder than a growl. I kept thinking it would break, that he would turn away and vanish like a ghost, and the forest would breathe again, and we would laugh the nervous laugh people laugh when they survive their own fear. I kept telling myself this would end the way things end when danger passes, without touching you. I kept trying to believe this was the end of the story, but what happened next hollowed out everything I thought I knew about animals, and about myself, and about what the forest remembers and what it gives back. I didn't know it then. I only knew my knees were shaking, and my mouth was dry, and my eyes were welded to that old bear's face, because somewhere deep down, deeper than rules and training and common sense, I understood that this was not over. He moved first, not toward us, but across us, a single silent stride that put his huge body between the widow and the dark brush where the quiet was wrong. Only then did the brush break. Gray shapes slid out one by one, ribs like bent bows under their coats, eyes flat and steady. Wolves. I have counted tracks all my life, but I did not count now. Hunger had counted for them already. They fanned to the sides, tails low, heads level, their feet hardly making a sound on the cold ground. The bear did not rear or charge. He planted his forepaws and lowered his head until his spine leveled like a beam across a doorway, and I realized he was making himself the door. I thought that might be enough to scare them back, that his presence alone would settle it, that this would end with a standoff and a retreat, and a story I could tell with a shaky laugh. I thought his part in our day was over. The lead wolf tested the air and stepped closer. The bear answered with a sound that did not belong to fear or rage. It started low, a pressure more than a note, and rose until the spruce needles above us trembled. It was not loud in the way a shot is loud. It was loud in the way a mountain is loud when it decides to move. The wolves' shoulders dipped, the circle loosened, then tightened again, like a breath they could not finish. The widow did not scream. She did not even lower the bundle of sticks she still clutched, as if wood could shield skin from teeth. Her eyes landed on the bear's back and stayed there, and I saw the moment it reached her. He was not aiming past her. He was holding for her. He did not look at us like at prey. He looked at us like we were his own. That truth punched straight through my training and left me with nothing but the ache of it. A young wolf, narrow hips and too much nerve, slid in close on the blind side. The bear did not swat. He did not waste motion. He only stamped once, a heavy, deliberate blow that cracked a dead branch under his paw and sent a clean message through the ground. The youngster flinched, as if the earth had spoken, and skittered back to the line. Another wolf came forward with a snarl, too bright to be honest. The bear shifted his weight and cut the angle, and the snarl dried in the wolf's throat. I had seen bears take what was theirs and dare anything living to challenge them. I had never seen one hold a line for someone who had nothing to give him back. This broke a rule I did not know I carried. It made space in me and filled it with ice and heat at the same time. Wind moved through and brought the rank sugar of wolf breath, the iron of old blood, the wet stone scent of the bear's coat. He kept tasting the air, not to fix us in his mouth, but to read the pack's nerve. The lead wolf gathered himself, weight back, ready to spring and test that line with teeth. The bear answered before the body moved. He peeled his lips and showed a row of teeth that looked like tools. Not a roar, not a lunge, a promise. The pack's feet whispered backward. The child had stopped shaking. He stood pressed to his mother's skirt, face tipped sideways, watching the bear the way a boy watches a father lift something heavy without strain. The widow's lips moved around a word I couldn't hear. Maybe it was a prayer. Maybe it was the bear's name, as she would tell it later when she had to give him one. The wolves tried a different plan. 2 drifted left, 2 right, leaving the lead in the center, and 1 ghosting behind us where a human back might break. I opened my hands. I made myself wide and useless and ready, though I knew I was a reed in a river if it came to it. The bear saw the shape of it before any of us. He swung not his head, but his whole front, a small, exact pivot that kept his mass between the danger and the woman. He gave that deep sound again, longer this time, and I felt it in my ribs as if my chest were a drumskin under his paw. 1 gray shadow bolted from the rear to force panic. The bear did the one thing I could not have guessed. He stepped toward the widow, not away, pressing her and the boy with a gentle shoulder until the live wall of him pinned them against the trunk of a pine. He traded his freedom of movement for their safety, and then he roared full, not at the wolves, but up, out, through, a column of voice that said he would tear the sky before he let the ground take them. The pack's courage broke like thin ice. They scattered into brush and shadow, tails tucked, pausing only once at the edge to look back with the doggish shame wolves wear when the story they wanted was taken from them. The clearing fell into a held silence. No bird dared claim it. Sap ticked in the bark. Somewhere water ran under a skin of late frost, a sound like breath cooling. The bear did not chase. He watched the last gray back slip between the trunks, and then he kept watching the place where wolves had been, as if wolves might be only the first verse of a longer song. His sides rose and fell, slow and steady. He had not burned himself in the fight. He had measured and spent only what was needed. The widow found sound. It came out of her low and raw and full of something I did not know how to touch. She reached a hand toward the bear's shoulder and then drew it back, fingers curling, as if she had almost touched hot iron and knew better and yet wanted the mark. The boy took 1 step into the hollow beside the bear's leg, a step small enough to deny and clear enough to shock me. The bear dropped his head and breathed, a soft huff like a sigh, and the boy's shoulders loosened as if someone had unknotted his shirt. I stood there empty of words. What I had seen did not fit into anything I could tell myself about the world. I kept waiting for sense to rush in and sweep away the impossible. I kept thinking, all right, that was it. His duty to whatever strange law runs under the moss is done. He will turn now. He will go. He will leave us with a story to hold and a silence to fill. I thought I would watch his back fade into the black spruce and carry on with my mortal business. But the bear did not leave. He stood his watch a while longer, then shifted as if answering a voice I could not hear. It was not hunger. It was not fear. It was not curiosity. He was waiting, and though I could not name what for, I felt the shape of it forming, the way you feel a storm gather behind a blue sky long before the first wind finds your face. He made the choice for us. He shifted his bulk and started walking, not away, not toward us, but alongside, sliding his body into the space between the woman and whatever the forest might think to send. The widow took a step as if she were learning how to use her legs again. The boy clung to her skirt, and then, as if a note only he could hear rang through him, let go. I fell in behind them, because I could not force myself to leave, and I could not make myself walk ahead. I kept telling myself he would see them to the path, to the first fence post, to the first footprint of town, and then he would melt back into the trees and vanish like smoke. I thought his part in our day was finished. I thought I'd watched the whole miracle already. I was sure he'd carry them as far as sight and then disappear. We moved in a crooked line through spruce and larch. The bear walked slow enough for a child to keep up, and sure enough for a grown man to borrow courage from it. He held a steady drift that always kept him between the family and the undergrowth. Every time the widow stumbled on a root, he paused, as if gravity itself belonged to him and he could lend her a bit of it. The boy stopped crying. He watched the bear with eyes so wide it looked like he was drinking light. There was a kind of peace in that child's face that I have only ever seen on sleeping animals. He wasn't looking at a danger anymore. He was looking at a promise. He looked at that huge head the way a child looks at a door someone strong has locked for the night. The first test came from the ditch where old snow still lay in the shade. A fox in winter colors lifted from shadow like smoke, thin and clever and hungry, a mouth full of quick ideas. The bear didn't break stride. He turned his head just enough to put one eye on the fox and opened his mouth in silence, showing the long, clean tools those jaws carried. It was not a threat. It was grammar. It said, "This path is taken." The fox weighed pride against bones and slipped back into the ditch as if it had never been, leaving only the sharp scent of itself behind. I let out air I hadn't known I was holding. A little farther on, from the far side of the draw, two bird dogs burst out, white and brown and boundless, their voices reckless with the kind of courage that comes from a yard and a chain. They saw fur and size and gave it every bark they owned. The boy flinched once and then looked up at the bear like a ship looks at a lighthouse. The bear planted all 4 feet and did not rear. He did not chase. He drew a breath I could feel from 10 paces and let it out in a low huff that traveled more through the ground than the air. The dog's paws slipped. Their barks broke into questions. They circled, confused by a wall that did not move and did not hate them. One turned tail. The other kept nagging until the bear turned his shoulder an inch, and that was enough to tell the second dog what the first had learned. There are doors in the world that will not open for you. We crossed a little marsh where grass lay flat and brown and water whispered under a skin of ice. On the far side, in buckbrush, a moose cow stood with her calf, ears knife-sharp, grief and rage right under her hide. I have seen a cow moose split a man open in one charge. The bear did what I could not have guessed. He arced wide, not away from the woman, but around her, drawing a bigger circle with his own body to give the cow a clear line for retreat. He popped a dead twig between his teeth and let it crack loud, a sound big animals understand. I am here. I see you. I am not hunting you. Do not make me change that. The cow blew steam, set her front feet, then swayed and took the opening, her calf tight to her hock. The bear watched them pass with a patience that belonged to a creature who knows every trail is older than his hunger. We threaded under a windfall, a giant spruce laid down by last winter's storm. The widow crouched and the boy crawled, fingers burying in moss. Behind us, a low shape slid along the log, all muscle and old anger. Wolverine. I tasted iron at the back of my tongue. The bear did not go for it. He rose just enough to rake his claws down the standing trunk beside him. 4 clean scores in raw wood, a letter written in a language I do not speak. The wolverine's head lifted. Its eyes offered a coin of rage and took it back. It turned the way a thought turns when it remembers its own foolishness and vanished into the snag. The boy slipped and bumped his knee and made the sound children make right before they break into tears. He set his jaw and swallowed it. He reached out without looking and touched the air about a hand's distance from the bear's flank, the way you reach for a stove you know is hot. The bear slowed, as if he were letting the boy's breath catch up. The widow glanced at me over her shoulder, and I saw her swallow a word she had not said out loud yet: trust. He didn't look at us like at prey. He looked at us like we were his own. That truth was a weight and a mercy at the same time. We came to a cut bank where the path widened and the smell of smoke grew honest. Somewhere ahead, a door thudded. Somewhere a rooster threw his voice across a yard. I could see the first crooked fence through the trees, a lean-to tin roof glinting dull in the clouded light. I told myself, here it is, the border where stories end and ordinary life takes them back. He will stop. He will lay down the impossible like a heavy coat and walk away without asking for thanks. He will vanish at the last spruce and leave us with a silence that aches in a good way. But he didn't stop at the edge. He stepped onto the track like it belonged to him as much as the moss and the roots and the secret paths, and we followed, because at that point there was no other truth to follow. He moved with the same careful measure, head low, eyes forward, reading what I could not read. I don't know what he was listening for, but I felt it gather in the air the way you feel a storm before the wind starts. He was waiting for something, and the road into town felt suddenly small under the size of that weight. Spring had ripped the skin off the river. What ran in that channel wasn't water so much as thaw and hunger, brown, cold, full of teeth. The old plank footbridge that used to carry people after storms was gone, torn from its posts and swept into the bend like a matchstick. The bank where we stood was raw and undercut. The far bank sat just a few strides away, close enough to touch with a long branch, a world apart. The widow stopped with the boy's hand in hers and made that small sound people make when they meet the edge of what they can do. I could feel the pull of the current from where I stood, a grip on my shins that wasn't even touching me yet. The boy stared at the glittering, angry skin of the river, then up at the bear, and then back at the river again, like he was weighing 2 kinds of power. The bear stepped forward first. He put one paw into the flood and tested it the way you test a floor that might not hold, weight shifting through him slow and exact. Water seized his leg and shouldered past. He did not flinch. He took another step. He turned his head back once to look at us, not to ask, not to teach, but to tell, this is the way. I said nothing because the words I had were too small and would fall between the stones and be lost. He moved out from the bank until the water shouldered into his chest and rose along his ribs, the current throwing little torn flags off his fur. I expected a swim, the long, powerful push of a big animal crossing strong water. He did not swim. He turned sideways and leaned into the flow until his spine lay broadside to us, his forepaws wedged against a buried stone, his hip braced into a root. Then, slow as sleep, he let his body tilt until he was half lying, half standing, making a low, living bridge not quite under the surface. For a breath I didn't understand. Then my stomach dropped as the meaning hit me. He was offering himself. The widow's eyes filled and emptied all at once. She slid down the bank on her heels, boots finding purchase in mud where there shouldn't be any. The boy pressed to her hip. I scrambled lower too, where I could grab a handful of willow if something went wrong. The bear held. Water combed his fur flat, found the hollows between ribs, threw off a fringe of spray, His head stayed up, one eye on us, the other on the far bank and whatever might come out of it. "Step on his shoulder," I heard my own voice say, steady somehow. Then his ribs. "Keep your weight low." It felt like telling a person how to walk across the back of a miracle. She went first. She put her boot on the thick pad of muscle above his foreleg, and then the next step on the clean arch of his ribs. He gave not an inch that he didn't mean to give. The boy followed, both hands clamped in his mother's skirt until he let go for one heartbeat and touched the bear's wet coat with his palm. A small, flat blessing given the wrong way around. I saw the child touch his fur, and the bear went still, as if he understood everything. The river tore at him, bumped a broken branch against his flank, pushed, begged, promised to take him downstream and fold him into its cold work. He did not move. The boy slipped once, just a slide of a boot with that quick sucking noise wet leather makes, and the bear answered with nothing but the slightest tightening under the boy's foot, a small lift of living bridge to meet small weight. The widow made the far bank and fell to her knees, yanking the boy into her arms with a sound that scratched her throat on the way out. I held my breath until my ribs hurt, and then realized I'd been holding it since he'd stepped into the water. Only when they were both clear did the bear push himself up. He did it in two clean motions. First a surge that took his forequarters out of the current, then a heave that brought the great engine of his back legs under him. He climbed the far bank slow, water pouring off him in sheets, and stood above us, dripping, huge, made of the same patient power that moves hills inch by inch. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a red streak down his fur, a thin line near the flank where the ice had cut him, but a second look showed only river mud. Maybe I wanted the price to be visible. Maybe the river kept its secrets for later. The widow reached for him with a shaking hand and stopped herself again, fingers closing on air. The boy, bolder in his honesty, patted the wet fur near the shoulder once, quick as a bird landing and taking off. The bear swung his head and looked not at them but past them, downriver, as if he were reading a page we couldn't see. A plank pinwheeled by and snagged in an eddy before popping free. He stepped back into the shallows, shouldered the plank aside like it was nothing, and nudged the widow's bundle of sticks, which had slid into the water in the scramble, until it lodged against a root where she could reach it. It was such a human gesture that my throat closed. We stood there, 3 people on one bank, one bear between banks, and the river angry beneath us, and the world felt new and raw and very old all at once. He had done the impossible and made it look like a thing he did every spring for neighbors. I told myself this was the end of his part in our story. He had ferried life across and paid with strain and cold and a little time. He would turn now. He would go. He would step back into the current and let it take his smell away, and we would be left with a day that would never fit inside ordinary talk. It seemed he'd done his part and would leave. But the giant didn't leave. He shook himself once, water flying in a ring that caught the weak sun, and then he set his feet again and lifted his nose to the air like a man listening for a voice in another room. Something on the far bank held his attention. A sound I couldn't hear yet, a scent I didn't have the years to read. He took one step, not toward the forest and safety, but along the bank in the same direction the road to town twisted through the trees. He was waiting for something or walking toward it, and whether that thing was danger or duty, I did not know, only that the river we had crossed was not the only border he intended to carry us over. Night came down like a slow hand closing. We were too far from any door and too close to the kind of cold that climbs bones from the inside. The widow looked at me, then at the bear, and then at the ragged circle of spruce where the wind couldn't pry so hard. That was where we stopped. No fire, no talk, only breath and the small sounds of people trying to be smaller still. He chose the ground first. He turned twice, heavy and quiet, tamping a bed the way a big thing will, then lay on his side with his back to the wind and his belly to the woman and the boy, as if he were a wall made on purpose. Steam rose off his coat. You could feel the heat of his body if you stood a few paces from him. A living stove humming. The widow lowered herself with that stiff, careful strength of someone holding on to the last of her courage. The boy curled into the hollow of her knees and stared at the wide slope of the bear's ribs as if staring could keep warmth from leaking out. I edged back into a copse of young pines where I could watch and not make the night remember us. I told myself to stay awake. I told myself to count breaths. The forest had other plans for me. It fed me every sound a man could hear and still not know what to do with. The slow creak of trunks rocking in their own roots, the dry rustle of a vole testing the litter, a low cough from high brush that said lynx, a baritone boom far off that said owl. Each time, the bear answered without lifting his head. A small shift of weight, a soft huff, a tilt of the ear that drew a line through the dark and wrote, "Keep your distance," in a language all night things speak. The boy stopped watching and surrendered to sleep. His mouth fell open. His hand slid, slow as dusk, to the bear's fur and came to rest there, fingers spread, not quite touching. The bear held still as a held breath. The woman did not sleep. She kept her palm on the boy's back and her eyes on the bear's face, as if the sight of him was the only lid strong enough to keep fear from spilling. Some time after the owl, the bear stood. It was not a sudden thing. It was a quiet decision that lifted a mountain to its feet. The widow tensed. A small, sharp sound caught behind her teeth, the kind of sound people make when the center of their night moves. He looked at her once, then turned into the trees without any of the care predators used to be ghosts. He wanted her to know he was leaving. He wanted her to know he meant to come back. I believed that, and hated myself for believing it. Minutes are longer in the dark. I counted a handful, then a handful again. The widow whispered to the boy and pulled him deeper under her coat. I could see the shape of her knuckles white in the low light. I told myself this was where the spell broke. He had done enough for creatures not his own. He would not give more. He would be far by dawn. Already a rumor a man tells only once. An hour later, or what felt like a year wearing an hour's face. Brush cracked low to the ground, and the big head came back through, muzzle sweet with a scent that did not belong to fear. He carried nothing in his mouth and everything in his smell. Honey, fermented sap, berry rot from last summer's tangle under fallen logs. He set his paws exactly where he had set them before and stopped 3 steps from the woman. Then he did a thing so simple it stung. He dropped his head, shoved aside a flap of snow, and pawed free a rotted stump swollen with comb. He tore off a small sheet with his front teeth, careful as fingers, and laid it between them. He nosed a mat of winter-blackened berries free of leaves and rolled them into a dark, shining pile. The woman did not reach for the food at once. She reached for her boy's hair and then for her own throat, and only then for the comb. She broke a piece as if breaking a sacrament and touched it to the boy's lip. He woke, tasted, and smiled in his sleep. The bear watched and did not ask for a share. He watched the way a man watches a door he has sworn to hold. I felt something give inside me. He wasn't a beast. He was a guardian. The words made my chest hurt with the size of them. If your heart just went still, you know. Subscribe. Here we tell the truth. Nature keeps hidden until it trusts you. The bear turned his face away while they ate, not from shame, but from a kind of respect I have rarely seen in men. When the boy's small hand reached again, this time without fear, and landed for real on the warm slope of fur, the bear did not flinch. He stilled as if the world depended on that one touch, as if moving would break something we could not put back. The boy's fingers spread and flattened and rested there, and in that moment, the night felt less like an enemy and more like a roof. I stayed where I was and failed at sleep on purpose. Twice more the dark tested our circle, once with the nervous chatter of a marten, sharp and close, once with the thick, wet pad of hooves that said moose passing uphill. Each time, the bear rose only enough to show the outline of himself against the little scrap of sky, and each time the test backed out, unwilling to try a story this large. What happened next was nothing and everything. He lowered his head and set his jaw on his forepaws and closed his eyes for the smallest part of an hour. He let himself rest within arm's reach of what any other day would have been fear. He trusted us. That might be the strangest part. I lay there and watched a thing I was not made to understand and felt my own edges change. I told myself the morning would take him. I told myself the first light would wash the spell off and send him home to his secret country. I thought he'd be gone at dawn. But morning carried another trial in its teeth, and the sun, when it finally found us, did not bring safety with it. It brought the kind of choice that writes itself in blood or in mercy, and I felt the day tilt toward it long before I knew its shape. Morning came thin and cold, all glare and no warmth. We moved back to the path because people think a path means safety. That was when the voices came up the trail, men laughing the way men laugh when they've been alone in the woods too long and find each other again. I heard the clack of a bolt. I smelled gun oil. The bear smelled it first. He stopped and turned his body sideways, wide as a door, between the widow and the bend in the trail where the voices were. They rounded the curve in a row, 3 of them, orange caps and big coats, rifles carried like second spines. They saw fur before they saw faces. The laughter died on their mouths. The lead man jerked the barrel up so fast the sling sang. The second man copied him without knowing he had. The youngest swore once under his breath as if he had just found himself inside a story he'd always wanted and did not know how to finish. The bear did not run. He set his feet, head low, ears forward, every line of him saying no passage, but not hate. He kept glancing back to place the woman and the child against the bark of a spruce like he could count them safer if they touched the tree. He didn't look at us like prey. He looked at us like we were his own. That truth hit me so hard it made me lightheaded. "Don't shoot!" I yelled, voice cracking in the cold. "Don't!" The word felt too small against the hard, neat click of safeties coming off. The widow's voice tore itself out of her, raw and high. "Please, he saved us. Please!" The boy pressed into the bear's hip as if the world were a wave and the bear a rock that would not move. Hunters see things other people don't. They see the tiny tells animals give before they spring. They saw a massive predator inside 20 paces of a woman and a child, and they did the math the way they'd been taught to do it. The lead man set his feet and shouldered his rifle and found the sight, and I watched his finger find the curve of the trigger. I already saw fingers tighten on the trigger. I stepped into the line because I was all out of other choices. "He's guarding them," I said, low and fast, hoping the shape of the words would land somewhere behind their eyes. "He drove off wolves. He ferried them across the river. He's not—" I didn't finish because the bear moved. He did the impossible. He sank, not like he was going to charge, not coiling. He folded himself down onto his belly, chin on his forepaws, making himself lower than the boy, lower than the woman's knees. He turned his head a little and pressed his shoulder back into the widow's shins so gently she had to take a step and set her hand against the trunk to keep her balance. He made a wall of his ribs and offered the rest of himself to the men with guns, not the way an animal surrenders, because animals don't, but the way someone makes a choice. He was saying, "If a shot comes, it will find me first." The men didn't know what to do with that. The youngest blinked hard like the world had slipped under his feet. The second man muttered, "Jesus," not as a prayer, but as a fact. The lead man's face went stony in the way faces go when they are trying to keep one rule from breaking under another. His barrel wavered and then settled again because training is heavy, and the sight picture was clean, and everything he knew about safety said this scene was wrong. If your chest just tightened, you understand. Follow. Here we tell the truths nature only shows when it trusts you. The bear breathed out, a low huff that traveled more through the ground than the air. He kept his teeth hidden. He didn't even lift his eyes to meet theirs. He stared at the dirt in front of the rifles like he was looking straight at the thing that could hurt us and choosing to swallow it. The widow slid sideways, put both hands on the boy's shoulders, and pulled him into the hollow behind the bear's elbow. The boy went without a sound. He had no pride to waste on fear. Back away, I said to the men, palms up, fingers spread, showing them empty human hands. Just back away. He'll go when we're safe. I believed it when I said it. Whether it was true didn't matter. I needed them to borrow my belief long enough to lower the muzzles. The second man's barrel dipped a hair. The youngest took a step that wasn't forward and wasn't back and ended up where he'd started. The lead man kept his cheek to the stock. He had a scar at the corner of his mouth that pulled when he clenched it. He was older than me and had likely buried dogs and patched friends and learned too many hard lessons to trust the one he was being offered now. His eyes flicked to the child, to the woman, to the bear's shoulder, to the size of the paw that could take a head off in one swipe if the story turned. He made the kind of sound men make when all the parts don't add up and their bodies choose for them. Don't, I said again, softer, because I could hear my own blood and because loud wasn't helping. The woods went so quiet, it felt like a weight. Somewhere far off, a truck door slammed. Somewhere closer, a jay scolded once and swallowed the rest. Frost burned off the grass in a thin white smoke. The bear did not blink. He only breathed. He was the calmest thing in the clearing and the most dangerous and the most gentle, all at once. I felt both saved and hunted and ashamed for not knowing how to hold all three truths without breaking. For a heartbeat, I thought we were going to make it. I saw the lead man's shoulder loosen. I saw his finger ease a fraction. I saw the breath he'd been holding escape him in a cloud that said he was still only a man in the cold with a hard job and a soft spot he didn't want. I thought this would end with mercy, with a story we would tell forever and get wrong in the retelling, and it wouldn't matter because we'd all be alive. But then the bear lifted his head, not to challenge, not to threaten, only to look past the men at something down the trail none of us had heard yet. He moved enough to break the picture in the lead man's sight, and the man flinched the way hands flinch when a pan pops grease. I didn't know it then, but we were one breath from the sound that would split the day open. He rose the way a mountain rises when you finally step close enough to see it, slow, deliberate, taller than fear knows how to measure. The bear came up onto his hind legs, not to threaten, not to make himself larger for our eyes, but to aim his whole body at the sky. His chest widened, his head tipped back. The sound that left him was not for men. It wasn't even for the trees. It tore straight up, a column of voice thrown into the cold morning, as if he were calling some older law to witness what stood on this strip of dirt. It wasn't rage, it was prayer. The lead hunter flinched because everything he had been taught told him that a standing bear is the last thing a child should share a clearing with. His finger tightened out of fear and training, and the small, hard mercy of survival that doesn't ask for permission. The shot cracked the day in half. The bear rocked as if a giant hand had shoved him from the side. The report ran out into the timber and came back smaller, as if the forest didn't want it. He took the bullet in the chest, high and forward, one of those mean places that do not forgive. Steam lifted off his fur. He did not fall. He bent at the waist and came back down to earth in a kneel that looked almost like a bow. The widow gasped a sound I will carry to my own last breath. The boy went still the way small animals do when thunder chooses their field. A bolt slammed forward. The second man's barrel swung with the clumsy speed of panic. I opened my mouth and found no words large enough to shove into the path of what was coming. The bear did not look at the men. He turned his head just enough to find the woman and the child, and then he moved with the last clean strength in him. He threw his shoulder back into them, not hard enough to break, just hard enough to knock, driving them into the bite of the spruce trunk. The second shot came as they hit bark. It punched the tree where their heads had been, spat chips and sap and a bitter smell that will always mean mercy to me. He took death for them. I don't know if the lead man meant to shoot again. His face had gone gray in a way that said the world had betrayed him by being more complicated than the rules that kept him alive. The youngest lowered his rifle as if it weighed as much as shame. The second man stared at the hole the bark was bleeding resin from, and then at the woman's hair full of pale wood dust, and then at the bear, who was trying to stand again and could not quite find the ground. The bear's breath came out in short huffs, each one smaller than the last. He was not roaring now. He was counting the living. He checked the boy with one eye, the woman with the other, and only then did he let his head drop. He pressed his paw into the dirt as if to sign something. His shoulder trembled. Blood threaded down his coat in a thin line that looked too tidy for the size of what had been done to him. I moved without meaning to. My hands were up, empty, stupid. I was halfway between the men and the bear and the family, and there was no place where I belonged. Anger and gratitude hit me at the same time and rattled together so hard I had to lock my knees to keep from going down. I wanted to throw the rifles into the river, and I wanted to hold the men's faces in my hands and tell them I understood because I did. I wanted to apologize to a creature who did not need my words and had already paid more than my voice could balance. The widow slid out from behind the trunk on her knees, dragging the boy with her across the needles. "No," she said, as if that one small word could undo the last few heartbeats. "No, no." She reached for the bear's face and stopped again, hovering, fingers shaking, then put her hand gently on the wide bone of his cheek. He didn't flinch. He blinked once, slow. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the trail when he chose to walk between it and danger. Behind me, the second man's rifle clacked empty. He had run the bolt out of habit, and it had nothing left to give him. The youngest set his gun down because his hands had turned into someone else's. The lead man took a step, then another, and then he stopped because coming closer would mean the story had to change names in his mouth, and he wasn't ready for that. The bear shifted, a small movement, as if the ground had tilted under him, and he had to correct. He rolled his weight toward the child and held himself there so the boy could press into the safe place at his elbow again, even now. The boy did, because children live in the truth in front of them, and not the rules that come after. He laid his hand on the warm, ruined rise of the bear's ribs and whispered something I couldn't hear. The bear listened, and then breathed out. It sounded like relief. It sounded like yes. I thought that was the end. Tragedy finished, the worst done, a lesson that would split us all and follow us forever. I thought the scene would narrow to grief and blame, and the flat work of carrying what we'd broken. I thought the story had closed its hand, and we were stuck in it. But the ending was even more terrible and more beautiful. The bear wasn't done. He had one last thing to give, one last look to lay on the world that would change every eye that met it. And I felt it gathering like light under a door, just before it opens. He went down the way big trees go when wind finally finds the crack. Slow at first, then all at once. His legs folded, his shoulders slid, his chest hit the needles with a thud I felt in my knees. The boy made a sound like a hiccup that got lost on its way out. The widow fell with him, knees first, hands out, palms skidding in sap and dust. I thought everything would disappear with him, his heat, his size, the strange safety he carried like a coat we'd all been borrowing. I thought the clearing would snap back to the rules I knew and leave us standing in them like fools who dreamed with their eyes open. She knelt at his head. The boy reached for his muzzle, small fingers working past fear, past sense, past everything but the need to touch. The bear didn't snarl. He didn't even show a tooth. He opened his mouth an inch and breathed on that small hand as if warming it for work. The boy's shoulders loosened. The widow's breath broke into pieces and came back as a whisper I couldn't hear. She wiped sawdust from his cheek like you wipe a child waking from a bad dream. I was still watching the men at the edge of my sight. Their rifles were up and then down and then nowhere because they didn't know where to put them. The youngest set his gun on the ground as if it were hot. The second stared at the hole in the spruce and rubbed his thumb over nothing. The lead man's jaw worked, then quit, then worked again. None of us fit inside our bodies. The bear turned his head, not toward the hunters, not toward the woman, not toward the boy. He found me. His eyes did not carry rage. They carried a weight I knew from winter storms and funerals and the first cry of a newborn when the whole house forgets to breathe. He looked straight through me and set something down in the space behind my ribs. I don't have a better word than wisdom, and even that feels too clean for what passed between us. I dropped to a crouch without meaning to. My hands were out, empty, stupid. He lifted his chin a finger's width and bumped the heel of my palm with the flat of his nose. Heat pressed into my skin. His breath smelled of river and resin and something sweet that had no business being there. I wanted to say I was sorry. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to promise something I could keep. My mouth gave me nothing. He forgave me anyway, or maybe he didn't need to. His breaths got smaller. Each one let go sooner than the last. The boy laid his hand flat on the warm rise of ribs. The bear held still for that, held still like the world depended on it. The widow slid her fingers into the thick fur behind his ear and found the skin there, and he eased his head into her palm as if that were a place he'd been before in some other story I'll never get to hear. He drew in one more breath, and it sounded like a door being pulled almost shut. His lips twitched, and there was the strangest thing, something that wasn't a smile and was nothing else it could be. He closed his eyes. He died like a person who had made a choice. Silence swung down. It didn't land. It hung in the air like a weight. A drop of sap swelled from the shot hole in the spruce and trembled and did not fall. The lead man took off his cap because his head suddenly felt like a place hats didn't belong. The youngest made a small noise that might have been a prayer with no words left in it. The second whispered, "God help us," but it wasn't a plea. It was a report. I thought the world would turn its back and leave us alone with what we'd broken. I thought the forest would shrug and go on. I thought the moment would go flat and pass like weather. That's what I thought, because that's what makes sense when you don't know better. The widow leaned in and pressed her forehead to the bear's. The boy said, "Thank you," in the voice children use when they mean it. The bear didn't move. A jay started to scold and then swallowed its own sound as if the taste of it was wrong. Somewhere far off, a truck door slammed again, or maybe that was my heart. Then the impossible kept going. The wolves came back, not like a charge, not like a circle, but like shadows adding themselves to the edges of the clearing, tails low, heads level. The lead wolf stood where the trail bent and set his feet and did not step in. He watched the bear's body the way a dog watches a sleeping man. No snarl, no creep. He held the moment with us as if hunger had stepped aside for something older. He turned his head once, checked the boy, checked the woman, checked me, and then flicked his ear. The pack peeled away into the timber, not running, not stalking, just gone, leaving the kind of quiet that doesn't come by itself. The lead hunter took one step forward and stopped. He held his rifle by the barrel and offered the stock toward me. Butt first, like a man handing over the last word he has. I didn't take it. He set it down on the ground, gentle as a cup, and stepped back. His boots made a sound that was too loud for how careful he was being. The widow looked up at me, and then at the men, and then at the bear, and something passed across her face that I still can't name. Hurt and thanks and anger and mercy, all in the same small space. She put her hand on the boy's head, and then on the bear's shoulder, and then on the ground, like she was stitching the three together so they wouldn't come apart. I thought we would stand there forever and then walk away one by one and carry the silence like a stone in our pockets. I thought the story had closed, but then something happened I will never forget. From deep in the trees, far beyond where the wolves had gone, a sound rose, low, steady, answering. Not a roar, not a warning, the same column of voice the bear had thrown at the morning, coming back to us from another throat. It rolled through the spruce and under our skin and settled in our bones. The boy lifted his head. The hunters turned without deciding to. The widow's hand tightened in the bear's fur. The forest did not move, but the story did, and I felt the day open like a door we had not seen until it swung. The answering call rolled through the trees and found us where we knelt by his body. It came from far off, then closer, then close enough to make the needles tremble. The lead hunter lifted his head like a man hearing his name from a place he thought he'd never go. The boy squeezed his mother's fingers. I felt the sound in my ribs before I understood it with my ears. It wasn't a threat. It was a reply. Brush moved on the shadow side of the trail. Another bear stepped out, broad, older, scarred along the muzzle, eyes dark and deep as a well. He did not rush. He did not flare. He stopped where the scent of blood met him and breathed it in like a truth he'd expected and hoped not to find. The wolves were gone. The men stood hollowed out and still. The widow tightened her hand on the boy's shoulder. I didn't know where to put my hands, so I let them hang empty. The new bear came forward 3 slow steps and lowered his head to the fallen one's neck. He nosed the fur, the wound, the earth, and then he made a low, soft sound, the kind mothers make when their young dream and twitch. He pressed his cheek to the dead bear's cheek and held it there for the count of 3 breaths. Then he lifted his head and looked at us, not through us, at us, one by one. The men, the woman, the child, me. The look was not a question and not an accusation. It was a measure, and we were found, and we were weighed, and we were not the center of the world. I moved first because my knees were already bent. I edged closer, slow enough to hear my own heart, and set my hand on the big shoulder that was still warm. Heat came into my palm like a tide going out. The fur was wet with resin and river and something else that made my throat close. He was heavy as a story you cannot carry alone. He wasn't just an animal. He was a life that had chosen. The thought came on its own and knocked the wind out of me. This doesn't happen, I heard myself say. This isn't real. But it was. I had seen it. The rules I lived by had watched it happen and kept their mouths shut. The lead hunter took off his cap and turned it in his hands until the sweatband showed, and then he hid it again like shame. "We killed the wrong thing," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The youngest swallowed hard and nodded so fast it looked like he was shivering. The second man set his rifle on the ground and stepped back from it, palms open, as if the gun might leap at him if he turned away. He put himself between, the widow said. Her voice was hoarse and steady at the same time. He did it again and again. She wiped wood dust from the boy's hair with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The boy looked at the living bear with that frank, clear gaze children use when nobody has taught them what not to believe yet. The bear looked back and did not move. I could feel the world deciding something around us. The living bear circled once, not wide, just enough to set his feet between the men and the body and the family. He stood there, No growl, no tooth, just stood, and in that stillness was a line I couldn't see and would not cross. The men didn't cross it either. The youngest stepped back until he touched the spruce and stopped like a tether had found him. I put both hands on the dead bear and felt for a pulse I knew I wouldn't find. I don't know what I was trying to do. Bless him, thank him, anchor him. Maybe I hoped my touch could hold the shape of what he had done in the world a little longer. He had died like a person who made a choice. That thought lit something in me that hurt and healed at the same time. A jay landed and didn't cry. A breeze came up the draw and laid a smell on us. Wet earth, cedar, the first green trying its luck under last year's rot. The morning didn't know how to be a morning anymore. It had too much to hold. This can't be, I said to no one, but I saw it. I heard the sentence leave my mouth and come back to me with the weight of an oath. I didn't believe myself, and believed myself more than I ever had. The forest had shown me a door and then walked me through it. The lead hunter wiped his face with the back of his wrist. "We'll carry the boy and his mother down," he said. "We'll put the guns away." His voice shook. He kept speaking anyway, because sometimes the only way to stand up is to put words in front of your legs and follow them. We'll tell it true." The second man nodded. The youngest stared at the ground and said, "I'm sorry," and didn't look up, because sorry is heavier when you keep your eyes down. The living bear waited until the widow had her feet under her. He watched the boy climb to his own and stand steady with his palm pressed to the dead bear's shoulder one last time. Then he stepped backward 3 steps, never turning his back, the way a man backs away from a grave he's not ready to leave. He lowered his head once, a nod that looked like permission, and faded into the trees. He left us with the body and the silence and the truth. He trusted us to do the next right thing. I felt that trust like a hand on my spine. We did not touch the dead bear again. We made a ring around him instead, men, woman, child, each at the distance we could bear. We stood there until the light changed and the cold let go a little and the world remembered how to move. I kept waiting for the spell to crack and leave me holding nothing but minutes. It didn't. The minutes kept carrying the weight without breaking. We walked out slow. The path was the same dirt it had always been, but my feet didn't know it. The lead hunter took the boy in his arms without asking and carried him over the rough places. The boy put his head on the man's shoulder and stared back into the trees as long as he could. The widow walked with her hand on the ruff of my sleeve, not to be led, just to be linked. At the last bend, I looked back. Dark wings moved where the body lay, but not over it, around it, respectful, patient. The forest was doing what it knows to do, and I was not part of that part. Down at the first fence, the men put their rifles in the back of a truck and shut the door on them like they were closing a chapter that had too many pages torn out. The lead hunter lifted his eyes to the line of trees and didn't hide what was on his face. He wasn't a beast, he said. He was more. He couldn't find the word. None of us could. The right word didn't live in our mouths yet. I don't tell this to make a lesson out of him. I don't tell it to make us feel better about what we did wrong or to wrap it up in a bow I don't believe in. I tell it because it happened, because a wild thing chose to spend his life like a coin on people who had nothing to trade back. Because the forest is wiser than I am, and kinder, and harder, and it keeps records I can't read until it decides to show me a line. Since that day, I have never looked at the woods the same way. When I step under the first spruce shadow, I feel watched in the good way. I hear small sounds and don't rush to name them. I carry my hat in my hand when I go by the river bend. I leave comb in the rotted stump. I talk quieter without knowing I'm doing it. I think of a big head lifting to a child's palm and the way a life can make itself into a bridge. I think of eyes that looked into me and set a weight down and said, without speaking, "Now you know. This doesn't happen. It can't. but I saw it. I was there. The breath left his body, and something stayed, and it changed what I am allowed to believe. Since then, I have never looked at the forest with the same eyes, and if you, too, believe that animals remember kindness, right, we are not alone in this world.